Hello everybody, Alistair Gold here. Yeah, another defeat. Let's be honest, this was not in the category of the Manchester United one, which was absolutely horrendous. There were certainly mistakes, and it wasn't a great match at all, but I did actually feel for the first half hour, Spurs played quite well. But we're going to talk about that in a bit. I think the main thing we need to start, kind of again for me, is the lack of leadership in the team. I felt there was yesterday. It was a game where Spurs really needed their leaders. They needed a reaction, especially after Newcastle goal, whatever people think about whether the rights or wrongs of it. And, they had started well. They'd started with energy, pressing, belief. They'd had chances. Sonny had a fair few chances. Harry Kane had a good chance. Ryan Sessegnon had a half-decent chance as well. That period alone before Newcastle scored their first goal, Spurs had 11 shots on goal. They were actually playing quite well. But then suddenly when they fell behind to what was just a really messy, stupid goal from Callum Wilson, I just felt the leaders at the back just seemed more intent on kind of pointing fingers, flapping their arms at the referee and kind of moaning rather than saying, okay, right, it was a goal, shouldn't have been. It was an injustice, but let's put it right on the pitch. That was something that didn't particularly impress me at all yesterday, and I think you need better from your senior players, personally. I felt Eric Dyer kind of carried over what was a shaky display at Old Trafford with another kind of stuttering show. It was his kind of day for me was marked by, I don't know if you remember, he played this back pass right near the start of the game, probably in the opening, maybe 15, 20 minutes. Played a back pass. It was like a rocket. It flew past Lloris, nowhere near him. And honestly, we all thought it was going in the bottom corner, but it just snuck past the right-hand post. That kind of, for me, just summed up his day. It was a day of lots of flapping his arms and complaining. Honestly, I don't think there was a moment where I didn't see Eric Dyer kind of moaning at the referee or official. He was moaning, obviously, a lot in the aftermath of the first goal. He was moaning at half-time as he walked off. I saw him go over at the final whistle and moan. And it was one of those where you kind of think, all right, you've got things that maybe you feel a bit of a kind of a burning injustice about. But ultimately, was your performance that good, or are you kind of deflecting from your own display? And I did. I felt that was kind of what he was doing. Whereas Lloris, it was a little bit the opposite in terms of, I felt, as you know, that he was superb against Man United. I thought he was absolutely brilliant that day. But this was chalk and cheese for me. This was back to Lloris being a poor decision-making as a goalkeeper. That was what it was. Whereas, I felt United, other than that one little flapped save, was it from, I think who it was from now? Doesn't matter. Anthony, maybe. That everything this time, there was a lot of nerves. There was a lot of stuff that shouldn't be from a World Cup winning, ultra experienced goalkeeper. And he didn't really, this is the irony as well, is you look back on this, he didn't actually have much to do on the day. That's the scary thing about it. In terms of, remember one good save from Fabian Schär from a corner. It was a good reaction save. Other than that, he only had a few things to do, and they were really jittery, the things he did. That first goal, we've got to go there straight away. It was just I'm repeating my words. I'm so kind of unhappy about it. It's the kind of goal that unfortunately we've seen with Lloris probably too many times. And look, I don't want to be too down on Lloris because I'm very aware that, I think I said last week, that he could have a stinker against or make a mistake against Newcastle, and then we all be straight on his back again. And I kind of am doing exactly that. But it's difficult when you see a very experienced goalkeeper like that, who can produce a performance like he did at Old Trafford. But then you also know, because he's got this sweeper keeper element to him, I understand that creates more risk for those kind of goalkeepers. Of course it does. There's more risks of making a mistake rather than those that just stand back and do nothing. But we've seen a fair few times when he rushes out that, it can go either way. And this was one of those either way situations. It was an awkward height, I'll say that. I think it's one of those where some people are saying, he should have just cleared it, like volleyed it. maybe it would have, by the height it was coming up to, would have had to probably do some kind of Daniel LaRusso crane kick style thing to do it. And in the end, he took the decision to chest it out, maybe because he was more worried about using his hands. That clearly was the wrong decision because Callum Wilson was right there, and he ran obviously into Callum Wilson. What I would say, I know there was complaining afterwards, and I did feel, on first reflection, I looked at it and just thought, that's really stupid, he's just run into him. On watching the replays back, I did feel like Callum Wilson kind of looked up at Lloris coming and put an arm like kind of out and almost around him. Just realised my hand doesn't even come into camera. And it did almost feel like a slight blocking off manoeuvre when you watch it again, whereas in the time it just looked like a collision. But then it was more about the reaction to me. Kind of Lloris did this very slow-mo fall to the floor and complain. Eric Dyer was flapping his arms around at the referee rather than getting back. And then by the time he started to realise, I better get back because play's continuing, Callum Wilson, to be fair to him, I thought played a really nice kind of chipped shot over the both of them into the goal. It's the old cliche, isn't it? Play to the whistle. Yes, you can be really unhappy and moan about something, but just instantly react. Your footballers kind of, your first thought as a goalkeeper and a central defender and the leader of that back line should be to defend. Complain afterwards. And they just didn't. Both of them kind of flapping their arms around like they were trying to take off. And yeah, look, VAR took a long time of looking at it. Seemed to be looking for a handball, which I thought was weird. It was almost like they immediately dismissed the idea that it could have been an actual foul on Lloris. And from what I understand, look, Conte came out and did his usual, I will not comment on referees. The fact that he was offering up the words, I won't comment on referees, before even being asked about referees on most occasions, suggested that he was very much saying it's about the referee. And from what I understand behind the scenes, the coaching staff were raging at it. When they saw the replays, they were raging because they felt that Wilson had deliberately looked up at Lloris, seen him coming, and then kind of flung out that arm to make sure he couldn't get around him. Yes, a lot of anger from what I understand. But I still don't think that was game-changing. I think Spurs allowed it to be game-changing, but I don't think it should have been. Like I say, the first half an hour, because what was that, 31st minute, that goal? I felt that first half hour, Spurs kind of had the game under control. I can't remember, I saw that was a BBC pundit, I can't remember who it was now, had said that Newcastle's midfield were dominating, and I didn't see that. I thought, what a strange take. I actually thought Spurs had dominated really well. I thought their midfield had done really well. And like I say, 11 chances created. If just one of those had been put away, that would have been the game changer for me. I think Newcastle would have had to come out even more, and it would have created lots and lots of space for Spurs to get into. So yeah, I get annoyance at the decision, but it doesn't excuse kind of the reaction to that. And obviously, I felt they kind of crumbled. I felt Lloris and Dyer in particular, I am going to single them out purely because they're the two leaders at the back. They're the elder statesmen, as it were. And I felt that their shakiness, their nerves, started to spread across the back line and the team. Dyer, like I say, had that awful back pass, and the rest of his passing really wasn't much better. He had a 74% pass success rate, which was way below the other centre-backs. And both of the other centre-backs managed a key pass. He didn't manage one, and that's kind of his job. He's like the quarterback in that back three. Lloris with his kicking, it's like, it is one of the most glaring errors in his game. And no, to be completely honest, you don't get a lot of goalkeepers that are great with their feet. It's just it is quite a rarity, and you'll find that kind of the very best are the ones that can do both. And Lloris with his kicking, every time he got the ball, it was like a sharp intake of breath. I think there was one time when he miscontrolled it, it kind of went behind him. And it was just, he was sending the ball kind of into places where it was no good to Spurs. Where it was either going off the pitch or it was putting them in trouble. And one such ball was the one that led to the second goal, not too long after the first goal. He kind of pumped it towards... He likes to play these chipped balls to the wings. I presume they're instructed. They're the ones he's meant to do. So he's often plays a little chip ball. It's either to the wing backs or it's to the wide centre backs. And he tried to do one to Ryan Sessegnon, which sailed far too high for Ryan Sessegnon. It was headed down, and of course Miguel Almiron took the ball, sprinted up the pitch, far too easily for me. Sessegnon was kind of bounced off, which wasn't great. I think Longley gave him too much space as well, if my memory serves me right. And then he just tucked it under Hugo Lloris. And it was a really, really poor reaction. And within, 5-6 minutes, the game then was turned on its head from being one that Spurs, I felt, were dominating to one where Spurs suddenly are 2 goals behind. It becomes a bit of a mountain to climb. And I did feel that the nerves were contagious because I felt like Davinson Sanchez, look, poor old Big Dav, technically, he can have some little moments where he's not as comfortable as other players, of course. But I did actually feel there was moments he defended quite well yesterday. But then I almost felt the shakiness spread to him. And there was one moment where, I can't remember, I miscontrolled the ball or passed it wrong. I can't remember what it was now. But the crowd instantly kind of got on his back. And look, football fans can do what they want in the ground. They've paid the money. They can do absolutely anything they want. But I just felt in that moment, with a player like Davinson Sanchez, it didn't help. Of course it didn't. And I did feel he got a little bit shaky at points from then on, mixed in with some good defending. And even Clement Longley, who for me was the most composed by a mile in that back line when he had the ball at his feet. Even as the game wore on, I kind of felt there were little moments where he started to get a bit shaky, where he'd turn into danger. And yeah, he was skinned far too easily a couple of times down that side of the pitch as well. Ahead of him, Ryan Sessegnon, I thought he made a really bright start, and it was like, he's really racing down the left to get into some good positions, some crosses that perhaps could have been better, but he was getting into those really good positions. But then I felt he faded quite badly. 61.9% pass success rate, which obviously isn't good enough down that side. I felt it replaced by Ivan Perisic, who was equally ineffective for me. Like I think I said this in a previous video, a little bit concerned about Perisic at the moment. I think he needs to, as a foreign player coming into the league, obviously have that little bit of adaptation time. Clearly is a top class player. Conte will keep telling you he's the one of the world. He is, if not the world's best wing back in his mind. I think after a bright start, though, I really think that he's gone off the boil a bit. Not really quite working for him at the moment. On the other side, obviously Emerson Royale was back, much to the delight of many of those Tottenham fans, from what I saw on social media. As always, brought lots of energy, got into some great positions. There was one point in, I think it was first half, when he was put through. He was running clear through, and it was just a bit like, okay, we know how this is going to end. I was just kind of intrigued to see how it came to that conclusion, and what it was he kind of stopped. It was almost like he didn't trust himself. He couldn't really control the ball to keep going on his own, and he ended up kind of bringing it back and stuff. And it was kind of a classic Emerson performance. He kept things simple, didn't really try anything too bad. He played a couple of key passes, he did, but yeah, ultimately that little bit of end product isn't there. He actually switched to the right of a back three for the latter stages of the game, which, funny enough, some people suggested maybe could be a better position for him. I don't know. But yeah, obviously he brought, I guess, fresh legs, is a way to put it. But then, to be fair, Matt Doherty came on down the right and contributed very little as well. Here's what Conte said when he was like the opening question. It was quite interesting because the first question, it was a slightly strangely worded one. The chap said, what did he say? It was something like, you played much better in the second half, didn't you? It was like a strange question, and Conte was a bit like, ugh. He kind of said, he started off saying, really, you think? And he said, instead, for me, in the first half, we started really well, we played really well. Before they scored, I think I have seen only my team. It was Tottenham, and Pope made 2-3 amazing saves if we go to watch the game again. Then we conceded this goal, which for sure we can do much better. I don't want to comment on the referee's decision because I don't like to do it, but for sure we can do much better in this situation. Then just a couple of minutes later, we conceded a second goal, and this second goal could kill everybody. Instead, if there is one side I'm happy with, it's seeing a good reaction from my players. I've seen in the second half in this situation, you have a big risk to lose your mind, to lose your head, and then risk to concede a lot of goals. We tried to score, we scored the one goal, and tried to create chances to level the game, but in the end, we didn't do it. In my personal opinion, I think the draw was the most fair result tonight. I think he's probably right. I do think that on the balance of play, yes, probably Spurs did. I think one of the more disappointing things for me was that after they got the goal, Spurs, Harry Kane heading in at the back post, the crowd were absolutely roaring, and it kind of felt like, oh, well, this is only going to go in one way. And it didn't. That was probably one of the more frustrating things for me, was that, if anything, Newcastle defended really well after that, and Spurs had no answers. That was strange. That's the kind of situation where, especially for a team that has won, what was it, 10 in a row in all competitions at home, they should have... That should have seen Newcastle crumble and Spurs kind of find a way through. But instead, we're going to talk about the substitutions. They were very uninspiring. They didn't really change the game in any way. Excuse me, losing my voice this morning. And yeah, poor. It was poor. That was why the question surprised me, and I think it surprised Conte, because I didn't think second half. I thought first half they were actually better. Especially that first half was the best period of the game for Spurs. Like I say, the start was good, and I felt mostly that was to do with Rodrigo Bentancur, who I thought was excellent yesterday, and Oliver Skipp, who was back, and I felt he had a bright, positive impact. Wasn't perfect by all means, but I did feel like he came back in and quickly found the rhythm of the game. Both kind of... I thought Isbasu was okay. He kind of had the less eye-catching role, I guess, of maybe just sitting behind those two guys. But both Skipp and Bentancur, they almost play like men possessed. They were really flying all over the place. There was a couple of times Bentancur did like almost pitch-length runs to press and harass Newcastle players. I mean, sprints as well, not just kind of slowly jogging up the pitch. Got his numbers for you yesterday. For me, Spurs' best player in the day. Rodrigo Bentancur, especially bearing in mind the verbal battering he got from Conte in last game, where he called him something rhyming with a thick head. So yeah, Bentancur's numbers: 2 key passes, 4 dribbles, which was nobody else on either side recorded more than 1 dribble on the day. But strangely, there was a few, wasn't there, where he just burst through from the edge of his own box and took the ball up, carried the ball up the pitch, like slaloming past players. And just unfortunately, others just couldn't continue that. Or there was one occasion I think he ended up running into a bit of a dead end. But he also made 2 accurate long balls and 1 successful through ball. And defensively, made 6 tackles and 4 interceptions, which were again far more than anyone else on the pitch. It was a really good performance. It was. It's one of those where, unfortunately, with the result, kind of gets buried a little bit. But I did think he deserved a fair bit of praise. And that final whistle, I looked at him, he was exhausted. Pretty much kind of dropped to the floor. And he's another one that Conte is going to have to manage very, very carefully, because he's giving his all out there. And when you're doing that constantly every 2 to 3 days, you really are in danger of an injury. Skippy, I felt, made a good impression. Bearing in mind, that's his first start since January. He was kind of playing as a winger at times. His instructions were that he obviously had to be one of the advanced midfielders. Emerson was often just giving him the ball, looking for the overlap. It shouldn't be that way. For me, it should be the wing-back flying up there, doing the overlap and getting the cross in. But obviously, like I say, Emerson has this more simple style where maybe he doesn't trust himself in the final third. And when it was Kulusevski, he would just play the ball simply to him and say, do your thing. And he was kind of doing that to Skippy yesterday, which isn't ideal. But to be fair to Skippy, he made a lot of driving runs, took the ball as well, carried it well up the pitch, I felt. Where did he go? Completed 3 key passes in the game, which was matched only on either side by Harry Kane. He also did 3. And he did 1 really nice kind of switch ball across to Sessegnon, which resulted in a chance for Cess, which had a shot which was deflected behind the goal. And he came off after 66 minutes, and I thought his fitness levels looked good. From what I understand, he's been leading Spurs fitness testing for the past 4 weeks as like the fittest player. So that's a good sign. It is. And Conte said his performance was good afterwards, having obviously mentioned about the fact that it's 9 months since his last start as well. So even relatively, I thought without that, I thought it was a decent performance for a 22-year-old chucked into that midfield with Højbjerg's absence. But if you take into 9 months out, out of the starting lineup as well. Yeah, I thought it was quite positive. It was quite bright. It was one of those things I think you can take from the game as, okay, well, that was good. That was something more. And to be fair to Skip, he's quite an honest, reflective guy, and he felt he could have done even better. I've got his quote, so I was listening to his interview on Spurs Play afterwards. He said, "It's not been the most ideal times, the 9 months since that last start. It's nice to be out there again, but it's always hard to reflect on that result because of what it was. It was nice to be back on the grass, but I would have liked to have performed a bit better and helped the team to get that victory. I feel 100% training hard. Obviously, that rhythm will start to come more and more with the more training time and game time I get. I need to keep pushing and making sure that when I get those opportunities, I take them and I keep performing better and better each time." And he pretty much kind of echoed my thoughts on the way they started the game and not really taking the chances when they should have. Said, "I thought we started the game well. We created chances, and perhaps there were a couple of moments with the 2 goals. It's always difficult when that happens, but there were times when we were sloppy as well, I thought. In the second half, it was always going to be more difficult after that. They were always going to waste more time, be defensive, and it was hard to break them down and create those chances. There's lots to improve on and reflect on, definitely." Newcastle wasted a lot of time. It's one of those mad things where no referee is going to set the precedent, unless I'm unaware of it and it's happened in the Premier League, I don't know, but you'll have a goalkeeper will come, and it was Pope on this occasion, of course. We've seen it before. Ben Foster used to do it all the time and wind up Spurs fans, where they would just take an age over everything they do, safe in the knowledge that that yellow card is not coming until the last 10 minutes, and the second yellow card is never going to come. It's just not. They just don't do it. Unless I missed one, and it has happened, 2 yellow cards for time wasting. I've never seen it. And they did. It just wasted so much time off the clock. And then also when Newcastle made their late subs, Callum Wilson, and was it Bruno as well, went off, Grimares? Both of them almost stopped on the pitch to turn and applaud the away fans, which, yeah, I'm sure it was lovely for those away fans, but look, we know why you were doing it. And I think, was it Wilson was on a yellow card? I think it was Wilson out of the 2. And you saw the ref come over and, like, someone alongside me in the press box said, "Oh, he's already on a yellow." And I just said, there is no way on earth he's getting a second yellow card. He's being substituted. It just won't happen. It never does. The referees just don't want to be that guy because they know it creates a big storm the next day, a big debate over whether it's right or wrong. But the irony is, if someone does it, it stops it. It probably won't happen again because then there is that little fear of, oh, actually, it did happen in that other game, the Spurs-Newcastle game. So yeah, it was incredibly frustrating. I think it also played that its part in winding up the crowd. I don't think the crowd were kind of quite focused on that aspect as well at times, and they were getting more and more wound up, which was not helping in terms of them getting behind the team instead. So yeah, more from Skippy. He said it's hard straight after the game to reflect on it, but I felt that we started well on the pitch. I felt we started our patterns of play well. Perhaps a couple of final passes were missing from everyone, really, but the goals changed the game. We felt like at half-time we were disappointed, but there were opportunities to get back into the game. We scored from a corner, but just after that, we didn't seem to create too many clear-cut chances, and it was disappointing. The way out of this little period is to work hard, reflect on those last couple of games, and there are plenty of things to improve on, and we'll be doing everything we can to make sure that come Wednesday that happens. That's a massive game, and everybody is going to be up for it, and they'll make sure that we've got that extra 5%. It doesn't feel like we're miles off. Yeah, I can kind of see what he means. It's one of those where it's just not clicking at the moment. And I think that gives the sense of it being far worse than it actually is. I think Spurs had, I don't know if I've got stats here. I might have the stats, but yeah, let me see. They're right down the bottom here. So Spurs had in all, I feel like it was 17 or 19. I will find it for you. This is terrific viewing for you, the side of my face. 17, I was right anyway, I didn't even need them. 17 shots on goal, 5 on target, and the majority just of possession. 12 fouls for Spurs compared to Newcastle 6, which maybe said as well how much they fragmented the play, Spurs. But yeah, 17 shots on goal. That's not a team that has just sat back and not done a lot. It just wasn't clicking. I do think Skippy's right in terms of some of the final ball just weren't there. Like I say, that first half hour, they convert a chance or two. I think the whole game's different. And it is at the moment, he's right, it's that 5%. It's that little bits and pieces in games where they're not doing it right. look, it is just back-to-back defeats after 3 wins in a row, so I really don't want to go overboard and stuff. And I keep saying the third in the league still, top of the Champions League group. We aren't talking about a team flirting with relegation or in big trouble or anything like that. This is just a team that I just feel just a little bit out of sync at the moment. They're not really firing on all cylinders, and sometimes it's like 1 or 2 players will play well in the game, and that's it. And that's what needs to improve for me. And for Skippy, obviously he'll be hoping for more game time, particularly if Højbjerg needs any more time out. I also wonder whether after yesterday's showing he could target Bissouma's shirt. Conte might look at that and say, well, Skippy maybe will bring a bit more. I didn't think Bissouma was bad at all. He just wasn't the Bissouma that we know, that we've seen in the Premier League. I think he just needs to find his rhythm in a Spurs shirt. It hasn't happened yet. He's not the player that he was at Brighton at this point. Whether it's having different tasks, different roles within this Conte team, I don't know. But at the moment, I think Skippy should be aiming to try and get in there again. Bentancur's going to need a rest as well. I think Skippy will get minutes in these coming few games. Then it's up to him to kind of take it. Look, other than that, for me, 2 things are growing more and more kind of certain with every single game. The first is that there is a huge Dejan Kulusevski-shaped hole in this Tottenham team. I'll say it every week. I think it's obvious. I think Conte is doing everything but saying it because he knows it. And the second is that Harry Kane is having a terrific season in front of goal very quietly. Because of all the Haaland buzz, I do think people are... I saw a ridiculous quote earlier, just before I started this. Some pundit had said, you wouldn't even notice Harry Kane if he wasn't scoring goals. Yes, he is. He is scoring goals. That's his job. And he's scoring a lot of them. And I didn't think he was that bad yesterday either. I did think he was one of the better players. He was trying to make things happen. But in terms of Kulusevski, I can feel Conte's frustration with his situation. It is palpable. He's not saying it so much, but he is kind of little hints at it. I think it's another one where he's not ecstatic about the medical staff. I get that impression. He's not saying that, of course, but I just get the impression from how he's terming things about Kulusevski. He was meant to be back within 10 days, and then he comes back into training and has a setback kind of thing, and then you can just imagine him looking off camera and going, "It's your fault," kind of thing to the medical department. It may well not be. It may well be that just purely it looked like everything was fine, and Kulusevski suddenly felt kind of a problem. I think the frustration also that it happened on international duty, absolutely out of Spurs' control. The fact that he thought he had him back only to kind of lose him again, that obviously is something that has happened a couple of times in the Conte reign. And Kulusevski is key. There is an irony in the fact that he's 22 years old and he's a very young player, but he is so important to Conte. Whereas Conte, there's a lot of his talk is often about these young players who, he needs senior experienced players. Whereas I think one of his most important ones is a 22-year-old who is the same age as Skippy, as Spence, as Sessegnon, older than Brian Hill, which is, it's quite funny in a way. It's not funny because he's out, because he is... just look at his... we'll bring these stats up until he returns. 17 goal involvements in his first 25 Premier League matches, which is 11 assists and 6 goals. Another little extra stat on this season itself. He started 6 of Spurs' 12 Premier League games. In the 6 games that he started, Spurs are unbeaten in those matches, averaging 2.6 goals and 2.3 points a match. And without Kulusevski, they've won 3 and lost 3, averaging just 1.1 goals a game and 1.5 points. It says it already, doesn't it? The stats are there. I think someone else pointed out, which is perhaps fair as well, that also if you look at the points against teams they've played in the top half compared to teams they've played in the bottom half, there's also a similar disparity. So there could be more to it, but I don't think anyone can deny that Kulusevski brings that magic, that little creative spark, that ability to create. Because I asked Conte on Friday in the pre-match presser, I actually had to waste a question because I was trying to follow it up because he kept swerving it. Like I just said, like, is that the biggest hole in your squad? Is that your problem in that you don't have a direct replacement or alternative to Kulusevski when he's out injured? Because, Richarlison and Lucas, both more direct, more forwards types rather than kind of playmakers. And Brian Hill is just a figment of all of our imagination. I don't think he actually exists. I don't even think we saw him warm up yesterday at any point during the game. And for me, Kulusevski is crucial at both ends of the pitch because at the Spurs defensive end, you can trust him in that you can give him the ball, whether it's on the flank or just outside the box, and he uses that strength and frame of his and his ability to dribble the ball to fly up the pitch, really, carry the ball, take it into the opposition half, and then the added bonus with him is at the end of it, there's something productive is going to happen. Whether it be a through ball threaded through into the middle, whether it will be him going out wide and slinging in a perfect cross into the middle, he just has that quality, a really clever ability to deliver the right ball as well. When we talk about decision making, Kulusevski is up there with and he's 22. He really is fantastic, and the balls that he puts in are the kind of types that Sonny and Kane thrive on. And that could be a big part of. We're going to talk about Sonny as well in a little bit. It could be a little part of why he's struggling a bit. Is also not having Kulusevski around because that he's a really great outlet for those strikers as well to score goals. He is a vital cog that makes the Conte machine work, and that's why I find it frustrating in the summer transfer window that they never brought in a similar player. Everyone they targeted seemed to be a different type of player, and that's why I think everyone is missing Kulusevski, including Conte the most. He swerved my question on Friday, which was really frustrating because I wanted to ask him a different question afterwards. I think it was about Longley playing in the centre of defence to give Dyer a rest because he didn't mention him before. He's only mentioned Romero and Sanchez as potential options for the centre of that back three, which I feel like Longley could suit it really well. So I kind of to waste that because he swerved it and I asked it again. And he did kind of hint towards the January transfer window, essentially saying, we'll see, we'll take stock of where we're at then and what we need. And it's a bit like, I think you should have taken stock by now. That that it's there, but obviously you probably can't say it. They just need extra creativity. And the irony is despite his words about young players, Conte's quite reliant on a 22-year-old. He is, I feel he massively misses him. It was a funny one because he kind of almost hinted towards him being worried about Kulusevski not being back before the World Cup. But then, he was asked to clarify that as he left the room. I think it was Dan Kilpatrick, I think, asked him. And he was just like, no, not concerned about that. He needs to be back, kind of thing. So hopefully, but who knows? Who knows with Tottenham and injuries? And as for Kane, 10 goals in 12 Premier League games. Just for a little bit of context, it's the quickest he's reached that tally in the Premier League in his career. Last season, it took him 25 games to reach that total. His goal was like a classic poacher's one. He's done a couple of them, I feel, this season, kind of getting on the end of flicked-on corners. This one, it took an age VAR because I think they were trying to work out whether Davinson Sanchez got a touch on it as well. I think it came off a Newcastle head first. Sonny's corner, good corner. I felt quite a few of Sonny's corners actually were quite good. They were kind of put into the mix, as it were. There were some iffy ones, but on the whole, I felt there were quite a few that were put into good areas. And this one it reminded me slightly of the Wolves one. Was it Wolves where was it Perisic or someone flicked it on and he headed it at the back post? Obviously, he headed home from a corner as well in a slightly different way against Chelsea. Yeah, he's been there. And this one was more of a diving in at the back post. He's now just within 7 goals of Jimmy Greaves' 266 goal record. And he also became the 4th player to score 10 or more goals in 9 consecutive Premier League seasons, following in the footsteps of Sergio Aguero, Wayne Rooney and Frank Lampard. So there you go. There's a consistent man. What a one-season wonder he has been. And I felt he tried everything. The rain was horrible. It was not that football's have to play in that, of course, but at half-time we kind of came back out after popping downstairs briefly, and it was like, what has happened here? It was like an apocalyptic scene. Pouring rain, lightning, thunder. It was like Thor was literally about to arrive in the middle of the pitch. And I felt Actually, saying that as well, I saw a video this morning of people out on the I forgot what the area is called now. Outside the back of the south stand, outside the raised platform. Oh, it's got a name. I can't remember what it's called now. It looked horrific. It looked like they were in the middle of some kind of tropical storm. People kind of hiding for shelter. One chap who'd very cleverly taken a wheelie bin and turned the lid over. So he was behind the wheelie bin, crouched with it covering him. Popped up on social media this morning, actually, before I was about to do this. But yeah, so horrible weather, and I felt Kane was still driving on through it, trying to get them back in the game. He teed up Perisic for a shot with a clever little reverse ball, which Perisic should have done better with. It was very low and comfortable for Pope. Played, like I say, 3 key passes, Kane, on the day. Played a really, he had a really nice mazy dribble himself in the first half, setting inside and out, and then played a low shot that Pope got like a toe to. And earlier in the match, he played a really nice through ball to Sonny as well, and Sonny went through. It was really such a shame with Sonny yesterday because he had 3 chances quite early on. He sent one at Pope, one onto the roof of the net, and then one sailing over the crossbar. And the irony is, and the one that I think where Kane had put him through, if he'd powered it like he did with those 3 other ones, probably would have flown into the net and left Pope with no chance because he was so close. But instead, he tried a clever little dinked effort over him, which would have been a beautiful goal. It worked, but unfortunately, Pope got a hand to it. The ball kind of then slowed up. It was still going towards the goal, but Trippier was there in plenty of time to kind of clear it away. And yeah, this still isn't the Son of last season. It's not. I get all the theories. I get the stuff about Perisic. And like I say, I don't think Perisic has been that effective either. I get the fact about, maybe he's playing in different positions this season. But I think, unfortunately for Sonny, you have to also look at the fact that the personnel's changing around him. And it's still not making a difference, really. The stats are kind of there that last season's Golden Boot winner, obviously, just voted 11th best player in the world in the Ballon d'Or, and he hasn't scored in any of his 11 Premier League starts this season, which is it's not like Sonny. It's not like Sonny. He has little runs of goals, he has little runs where maybe he doesn't score, but ultimately he's still always contributing. And this, for me, is the first time I've seen Sonny not able to kind of contribute goals or assists. I do think it's just a case of him finding his groove. Because, like I say, yesterday he was getting in positions. He had 4 chances in that first period before the goal, and that kind of 1v1. They're the ones that he has been burying in recent seasons, especially last season. So it will come. It will come. I don't have any worries about Sonny. I just feel like whether it is adapting to a slightly different role this season, I don't know. Whatever it is, he's a clever enough player, I think, that it'll happen. And like I say, I do think Kulusevski makes a difference as well. I do still feel that Spurs are at their best when it's that front 3. Kulusevski, Kane and Son. I do. So yeah, let's see. Maybe that's the missing link, as it were. Yeah, so as I say, Spurs still 3rd in the Premier League, top of the Champions League group. But obviously these back-to-back defeats and the manner, especially of the Old Trafford one, and the crumbling nature of this end of the first half, the lack of goals and creativity, I guess, as well, it's only increasing the frustration. Look, there were loud boos at half-time. We knew it was coming. We knew it in the press box. We were very much like, wait for this whistle. The boos are coming. And they did. They did. And there were murmurs of discontent at the full-time whistle. And Spurs have got this thing where, obviously, if they win, they put on glory, glory, Tottenham Hotspur. If they don't, and there's a bit of frustration they know coming, they whack up some kind of loud music. And yesterday's was right about now, wasn't it? The Fatboy Slim song, I think. And yeah, just essentially just drown out any noise kind of thing. That's my cynical thought. It might not be, but to me it kind of feels that way. Because, I guess perspective-wise, that defeat ended what had been 8 consecutive Premier League wins at that stadium in front of the supporters. It was becoming a fortress, which was what made it even more annoying, I think. And there is frustration. There's a bit of annoyance. I've seen some overreactions, of course. That's what social media does. We know that. Like I say, I've always said this, and I will continue to say this. I think maybe the reason I can have a little bit of context is because in my previous life, as it were, as a reporter, I was covering non-league, I was covering League Two, and I was covering teams that were going out of business. That might not even exist anymore, and the fans of those clubs obviously had huge concerns and worries. So obviously, seeing a team third in the league and top of their Premier League, third in the Premier League and top of the Champions League group, I'm not probably going to go wildly overboard in thinking the end is nigh. Purely maybe because of that context that I've had before. And I do feel like it's something that can be fixed at the moment. Like I say, it's just a couple of games that have been defeats. Yes, I do admit that there's been other games where Spurs haven't been in full flow. And I think Les Ferdinand, I saw a little clip of something yesterday, and he said, which is, I think is fair. I don't think there's many games, if any, that you can come away from this season and say, wow, Spurs were spectacular. And I agree with that. I do think that's right. But I will also counter that with the fact that it also means that they still haven't reached that point, and despite the fact that they're third in the league and all of that. And it was frustrating was the results went for them yesterday. Obviously, Arsenal being held to a draw, Chelsea and Man United also drawing as well. It was there, and Liverpool losing. It was to put a bit of distance between them as well in case they start to put things together. And Spurs said, no, you're right. That's what they do. But weirdly, do you know what? The one person who doesn't seem concerned at all by it, and it's the person who I thought would, is Conte. Conte really doesn't seem worried at all. And bear in mind, he's one of the most emotionally charged managers in the game. He seems really calm right now. And do you know what? I go as far to say he feels all in. He does. He feels really invested. Look, I know there's this little narrative that's going around, and I saw a little clip from Sky's coverage of the game, and there's this kind of thing about, he's only got a contract to the end of the season, so what kind of stability is there? I must keep stressing this because I know some pundits, some whatevers don't really seem to know this. Spurs have that option to make it another year. They do. That was agreed with Conte when he first signed back in November last year. So the only reason for Conte to be out of contract at the end of this season is if Spurs decide not to take that option up, which is incredibly unlikely, bearing in mind the improvements he has made at Tottenham and getting them into the Champions League. And like I say, I wouldn't be stunned if it's a new deal anyway, let alone the option. So I feel like that's a narrative that's an easy one, born out of maybe a lack of knowledge of this option. So when your club's got an option like that, it doesn't mean that they're out of contract at the end of the season. It just doesn't. I asked him afterwards where he was worried about, you know what I said earlier about the leaders looking a bit shaky. I asked him whether he was worried about that. And he was just like kind of dismissed that and said, no, well, this is his answer. He said, I think my only worry at this moment is we have to try to keep our fingers crossed and don't have injuries because we're not a team with such a depth of squad to face competitions like the Premier League and the Champions League. But this is not something against the club. Absolutely, we all knew this situation. I spoke with the club, and if you remember very well at the start of the season, I said to you that we need to go step by step and have time and patience and have 2 or 3 transfer markets to bring the squad to be competitive to play in 2 competitions like the Premier League and Champions League. In this moment, we're playing massive games, and for example, there are players like Højbjerg who's played every game, and at the end there was an injury because he was tired. I mean, it's the United game. He was a risk, and it's the same for Cuti Romero and for Richie. He played with the national team and then he came back. For Decky, honestly, this was where you could feel the frustration. Our expectation was to have him recovered much earlier. Instead, the situation was worse and we needed to wait. Lucas Moura started the season with this problem in his tendon, and now he's trying to recover a good physical condition. See, that was an interesting little thing. I don't think we knew that Lucas had that since the start of the season. For Skippy, it's the first game since January, and he kind of started to laugh, Conte, and he said, when you put all of this together, we have to have experience. Okay, you have to have experience. In this moment, it's very important for me to cope with this difficult moment and to have experience and try to go until November in the best possible way. For this reason, we need to be focused on recovering in 2 days. For sure, there are players that need to rest for 2 days to recover because we have players who, for them, this was 7 games in a row and we don't have the possibility to make rotation in this moment. Our target now has to be to try on Wednesday to win the game because to go to the next round of the Champions League is a good opportunity for us. I know it will be difficult, but we have the possibility to do it, and then to try to manage the situation until the last game in November. Then there is the World Cup, and we will see what happens. I think he means at the World Cup with injuries, but also I think he means transfer window there as well. So I think the fact he was laughing at times kind of is the fact that he knows it's outside his control to a degree. These injuries are, losing Kulusevski, Richarlison, Romero and Højbjerg, that's 4 players right down the spine of your team pretty much. So I get that. But you know what? I still keep saying this, especially compared to last season. That last season he was always talking about his future being unclear, even suggesting he would leave the club if he was the problem in any moment where things weren't going right. And I just feel like he's constantly talking about a future that involves him at Tottenham Hotspur. Constantly. Obviously, like I say, the pundits that aren't seeing or knowing that he has this option, Spurs have this option to extend his contract by a year, they're kind of saying, he's calling for time and patience, but, is he going to be there if he's out of contract next summer? And how the players view that kind of thing. But like I say, the only way he's out of contract next summer is if Spurs decide not to either take up the option or give him a new deal, which would seem incredibly unlikely with the progress that's being made right now. Yeah. I mean, I think there was a key thing. Actually, it's in this quote, I think. So I'm going to say this quote to you as well. So I asked him about that time and patience. I said, obviously, you're very frustrated with the injuries. I can see that. But do you still have the time and patience yourself for what comes next? And he said, yeah, for sure. This type of situation does make me frustrated because I would like to play this type of game, also in the Champions League, with the best team, and then to have on the bench 3, 4 or 5 good substitutions and try not to invent situations. You understand? But we knew this, and when I spoke before, I always said, look, we have just started the process to bring Tottenham into the best position to be more competitive, to fight for something important. We have just started. For this reason, we need to cope with this situation. For me, it is not easy, it is not simple, but we have to cope and to manage the situation with experience and stay together. Today, I don't have complaints about the attitude, the will and desire of the players because every single player performed. The attitude and effort was really strong and really big, but sometimes it is not enough. Tonight, it was not enough to avoid a loss. So, I don't think you can make it any clearer. We have just started. Not the club, not they, but we. And look, whatever the unhappiness and the lack of creativity and attractive football right now among some of the fan base, and me as well, and the media, I don't think we're going to games being wowed whatsoever. I do think there's certain, like I say, there's missing elements to the team, which is making that a thing. But I do also think the fact that Conte is looking so clearly to the future and the future with him in it does show that he's not concerned. And for a guy who, does have a reputation for short-term projects, I do think he's very much looking at long-term. And it's kind of reminding us, and I suppose this has to go to me as well, that he has continually said this is a longer process, and that he has got, an eye on future transfer windows as well. And perhaps because Spurs are in third position, is actually has raised expectations rather than maybe as listening to what he's saying in that regard. I don't know. It's really difficult. It's very frustrating the way Spurs are playing right now, and it's very easy to kind of be a bit down on it. But then also, when I see a manager who I consider to be one of the world's best, I mean, like I say, 442 just voted him, was it 4th best in the world? Currently as well. And, so this is no muppet. This is no guy that doesn't know what he's doing. And I've seen some people say, his tactics are archaic and all of this. I do think he's hamstrung, certainly by, I don't want to use hamstrung with injury issues at the moment, but I do think he's hamstrung by some of the things that are happening. I do think he's got a lack of trust in certain players as well. And I do think the fact that the injuries, because of the sheer volume of games and him not being as willing to rotate, is going to get more of this knocks and the fatigue. And also, it's leading into training issues where I do feel like Conte's best work is done on the training pitches in preparing teams for matches. And he's not been able to do that, be it for injuries, also be it for like he's just kind of said that these players, most of them, if they're going to play on Wednesday, are not going to be able to train for the next 2 days. So he's not going to be able to walk them through. He's not going to be able to kind of work with them all the things he wants to see from them, because they're just literally recovering. That's kind of what he's doing right now. And, obviously he's got Romero and Højbjerg. You said about them, Romero was the last 2 or 3 games. He arrived every day, half and half, to decide if he plays or doesn't play. I think in the past we have taken a risk. The players gave their ability to play. Otherwise, honestly, if a player doesn't want to play, I don't force the player. Now, after the game against United, he felt a lot of fatigue, and then yesterday he felt fatigue in his calf, because in his thigh, before in his thigh, the right, now left in the calf. Pierre, it was the same, because Pierre played every game. He played every minute, and he was really tired. About Richie and Decky, no chance. I think he means for Wednesday. I don't know about Pierre and Cuti for Wednesday. If you ask me in this moment, I don't have an answer, because I don't know the way they recover from this fatigue. And in this situation, if they have something, Romero in his calf or Pierre in his thigh. I think some people took that slightly wrongly about Romero, almost making out Romero declared he was not going to play. And of course, because he's got injured on international duty before, people say, oh, he'll play for Argentina with no legs and arms kind of thing. I don't think that was the case. I think they were actually saying the opposite, that Romero has kind of been putting himself out there, despite the fact that he's been really 50-50 for games. And just this time, it was just decided it just wasn't really in a fit state to play the game. So, yeah, I don't think people have got that one quite right. Maybe they've seen a bit of a quote, maybe something that I put out, maybe I didn't put out the full bit of a quote, I don't know. But also, it's interesting that Conte said about inventing situations in his earlier answer to me, dealing with missing players and stuff. I think some of those situations include playing with the 3-5-2 because of the lack of fit forwards needed for the 3-4-3. And also, I think providing substitutions that were all a bit like, oh man. One of those, obviously, was Ben Davies and Matt Doherty coming on, which, it was... It's one of those where, I think the idea was that Davies would provide more thrust down the left than Longley did. Obviously, he's got a little bit more of a forward-running motion in his game. And that he would push on with Perisic down one side, and obviously Doherty would provide more attacking threat down the right, with Emerson switching into the right of the back three. And look, it has kind of worked before. He did bring on Davies and Tanganga against Marseille in the Champions League, and literally minutes later, Richarlison has scored a couple of goals. It gave Spurs a little bit more of a forward momentum from the back. But I 100% understand that it doesn't inspire the crowd in any way. I don't really think it inspires the team. Especially when the crowd, I think, see people like Brian Hill on the bench, who we've seen come on and make an impact late in the games. Was it against Frankfurt? And Jed Spence there, who we know has got that thrust, and he would try to add something that little bit different. But they're just sitting there gathering dust on the bench. They really are. That's, I think, will frustrate people more than anything, that it feels like there's a couple of more attacking options and he's not taking them. And that's something, maybe Conte needs to look at himself as well, and just have that little bit more trust with them. Like I say, one of the players he trusts the most, who's feeling the absence the most, is a 22-year-old. And yes, he's got a hell of a lot of experience. I completely understand that. This is a guy that's played at Parma, played at Juventus, kind of at these kind of high levels in Serie A. So yes, he has been playing since he was young, because he's a bit of a wonder kid, as it were. But still, you don't get experience unless you play. It's a vicious circle. And he's going to lose more players. He is, to injuries, because of the amount they're playing. It's going to happen. Like I say, he hasn't got that training time with the team because they're recovering so much. The media on Tuesday will go and watch 15 minutes of open training. I'd imagine what they'll see is one of two things. They'll either see loads of players not there, which will cause a panic, but actually it's just because they've been told, no, just go away and recover. Or they'll have players who are not even are purely taking part in the little fitness drills at the start, and as soon as the cameras are away, they'll just walk around, and Conte will walk them through, talk them through what he wants, and there won't be any proper training. The Sporting game is a big one on Wednesday. It really is, because it also has a knock-on, apart from the fact of obviously Champions League success, all of this, it actually also has a knock-on effect that if Spurs can win it, they qualify from the Champions League group, and that also means that Conte can then rest and rotate a fair few players against Marseille in the last game. Yes, I know it could still be that they're trying to go for top spot, it likely would be, but I just think the fact that they're through would be important. So I do think he could rest lots of players for the Marseille game. And then also he's likely to rotate for the Carabao Cup game against Forest, who I think will probably rotate as well because of the sheer volume of players they've got to play. And obviously their focus being on staying in the Premier League. And the thing is if he can rest players for, or rotate players for Marseille and Forest, that means then that he can play his first team, kind of strongest lineup against Bournemouth, Liverpool and Leeds and have a week between each one, which is huge for Spurs and a Conte team. I do think it is. And they're the last 3 Premier League games before that World Cup breaks it in the middle. And after that, obviously, comes the January transfer window, which I've said this a million times. I'll continue to say it. There will be arrivals. There will, because I think Brian Hill has to go on loan somewhere. I think Japhet Tanganga has to go on loan somewhere. And I think to let that happen, Conte needs ready-made players that he will want as well. I think Spurs will see, or Daniel Levy, Paratici, whoever you want, will see where Spurs are at. And I still believe they'll be 3rd or 4th. And then they'll see that and they'll think, right, okay, we've got that platform. We need to build on this second half. And also, who knows what happens in the World Cup and what injuries occur. So I think they will have to splash some cash. I do think they will. He needs more creative options on the bench. He needs a Kulusevski alternative. So yeah, I do feel like Conte is invested in Spurs right now. I really do. And I was talking to some of the people behind the scenes yesterday and they were saying they feel that as well. And I think Spurs very much seem to be as a mutual thing. They're invested in Conte right now. And I think both of them now need to give the fans something to get excited about, whether that's Conte making some decisions in games that are a little bit more inspiring, and the club obviously backing him in this next transfer window. Like Conte said, it's about all of these transfer windows. What's saying apart from January, it includes January, so that needs to have stuff as well. So yeah, right, my voice is knackered. So I'm going to head off now. I am off for a couple of days now. I've got loads of loo days and holidays kind of racked up because of the amount of, certainly the first half of the season, the amount of games, and also did a lot of work over the summer and the pre-season tours. So I've got a couple of days, so I'm not going to be at the Sporting game, actually, or the Bournemouth game. But if I get a bit of time at some point, I might try and do a video, but it's not guaranteed this week. So the next one might not be until after the Marseille game. So yeah, I'll see. I'll see how things pan out, but I'm kind of out and about and not around too much. So I will be keeping an eye, of course, on everything that happens and seeing where things go with Spurs. But yeah, hopefully it turns back in the right direction, because there's a little run of games here, and then obviously they've got Liverpool. They've got a couple of games and they've got Liverpool. If they can get a bit of momentum back, then I think things will suddenly start to look a hell of a lot rosier, but they need to do that. That's easier said than done. Right, on that note, I'm going to head off. As always, stay healthy, stay safe, look after yourselves, and I shall catch you later. Goodbye.